The billionaire walked slowly through the cemetery, the cold wind brushing against his face as if trying to remind him that life moves on even when it feels impossible to breathe. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the loss of his young son, a bright, cheerful boy who had brought light into his life and then suddenly was gone. The graves stretched endlessly around him, each one a silent reminder of lives once lived, of stories ended, and of moments that could never be repeated. He had visited this place many times before, but today was different. Today, the grief inside him felt sharper, rawer, as if it had finally settled into his bones and refused to leave. He paused for a moment, standing in front of a row of tombstones, and tried to remember the little moments with his son, the laughter, the mischief, the tiny hands that used to cling to his own. The memories made his chest ache, and tears threatened to spill despite the billionaire's usual composure. Money had bought him many things in life, but it could not bring back his son, it could not erase the emptiness in his heart. He realized how often he had been absent, caught up in work, in business meetings, in the endless pursuit of wealth, and now he wondered if his son had felt unloved in the quiet moments when he wasn't there. The billionaire's grief was not only for the loss itself but for the regrets that clung to him like shadows. He thought about the arguments he had with his son over trivial things, the times he had ignored his boy's questions or promised to spend time and then failed to do so. Each memory stung more than the last, and he felt a deep ache of guilt mixed with sorrow. He understood now that life was fragile, that wealth and power could never replace love and presence, and that even someone as rich and powerful as he was could not escape the raw pain of losing a child. As he walked toward his son's grave, he noticed how quiet the cemetery was. The usual sounds of birds or distant footsteps seemed absent, leaving only a heavy silence that pressed down on him. It felt almost as if the world itself was mourning with him. The billionaire lowered his head, letting the wind carry away his thoughts for a moment. He remembered his son's favorite games, the stories he used to tell, the tiny smile that could light up a room, and he wished he could hear it just one more time. He knelt beside his son's grave and placed his hand on the cold marble, feeling the chill seep into his fingers. The name engraved there stared back at him, unchanging, permanent, and he felt a surge of emotions he couldn't control: sorrow, regret, longing, and love all mixed together in a heavy storm inside him. He whispered his son's name softly, almost afraid that saying it aloud would make it real, and he wondered if his son could hear him somehow, if somewhere beyond this world, his little boy knew that he was still loved, still remembered, still missed. The billionaire also thought about how life had changed since that tragic day, about the emptiness that followed him everywhere, about the nights spent awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how he could have been a better father. He realized that grief was not just sadness, it was a living, breathing thing that followed him, shaped his thoughts, and reminded him of what truly mattered, for a man used to controlling every aspect of his life. This grief was unpredictable, untamed, and impossible to ignore. It forced him to confront himself, to see the cracks in his life, to acknowledge the things money could never fix. Yet, amid the heaviness, there was something quietly human about this moment, something that reminded him that he still had a heart, that he still felt, and that love, even when it brought pain, was what made life meaningful. He realized that visiting his son's grave was more than just an act of mourning. It was a journey into his own soul, a confrontation with the feelings he had long tried to suppress. Each step he had taken here had brought him closer not just to the grave but to the understanding of himself. As he stood there, looking around at the rows of silent stones, the billionaire felt a mixture of despair and clarity. He understood that grief could never truly be escaped, but it could be shared, it could be felt fully, and it could, in its own strange way, teach him about love, compassion, and the fragility of life. The wind continued to blow gently around him, carrying with it the memories of his son, and he allowed himself to simply feel, without shame or pretense, knowing that this was the first step toward healing, even if the pain never fully disappeared. And in that quiet, lonely moment, the billionaire was not just a wealthy man, not just a powerful man, but a father, a human being, broken but still capable of love, standing in a cemetery, confronted by grief, yet slowly learning that sorrow was not the end of the story, but the beginning of understanding the value of life, the importance of human connection, and the way love lingers, even after loss. As the billionaire slowly made his way closer to his son's grave, something unusual caught his eye. At first, He thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the wind among the rows of tombstones, but as he drew nearer, he realized it was not a shadow at all. It was a small figure, hunched over, trembling softly, her tiny shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. The sight made his heart tighten, not from surprise alone, but from a strange mix of curiosity, concern, and a sudden, unexpected tenderness. He had walked through this cemetery countless times, yet he had never seen anyone like this here before, a little black girl, no older than 7 or 8, sitting alone in the cold grass, weeping quietly. The billionaire paused a few steps away, unsure of what to do. There was something about her sorrow that felt raw and real, different from the polite, restrained grief of adults he was used to seeing at gravesites. She wasn't just sad, she was lost in her feelings, entirely alone with her pain, and yet, strangely brave. She didn't flinch at his presence, didn't cry louder or run away. She simply continued to weep, letting her emotions pour out, as if the world itself had abandoned her. The billionaire felt a lump in his throat, realizing how rare it was to witness such pure, unguarded emotion. He looked around briefly, expecting perhaps a parent or relative to appear, but the cemetery remained quiet, still, and empty. The girl's small figure seemed impossibly alone in the vast, cold field of gravestones. He felt a strange pull toward her, a sense that he needed to understand why she was here, what had brought her to this place of sorrow. The thought that a child could be carrying such heavy grief alone made him reflect on his own pain, and for a moment, he saw his own loss mirrored in her trembling form. Slowly, he approached, each step careful and deliberate, not wanting to startle her, but feeling that he had to bridge the silence somehow. When he was just a few feet away, he crouched down to meet her at eye level. His presence was quiet, non-threatening, just a man who had experienced loss and recognized it in someone else. "Hello," he said softly, almost a whisper, "why are you here all alone?" The little girl looked up, her tear-streaked face wet and red, and for a moment, he thought she might shy away, but instead, she spoke in a small, trembling voice. I came to see him," she said. "I miss him." The billionaire's heart ached at the innocence of her words, the simple truth of them. He didn't know who she had lost, but somehow, it didn't matter. Her grief was genuine, and it reflected a love and loss that needed no explanation. He wanted to ask more questions, but he also understood that sometimes words could not reach the depth of sorrow a child feels. He decided to sit on the edge of the grass, leaving a small space beside her, respecting her distance, yet offering silent companionship. For a long while, they sat in quiet together, the sounds of the cemetery around them muted, as if time itself had slowed to honor this fragile, shared moment. The billionaire felt the weight of his own grief lighten just a little. Simply because someone else's sorrow reminded him that he was not entirely alone in his pain. As he observed her, he noticed details that made her real in a way no one else had been today, the way she hugged her knees to her chest, the soft sniffles that escaped between sobs, the tiny hand brushing away tears. It was a moment so human, so raw, that he realized grief did not discriminate by age, wealth, or background. It could touch anyone, anywhere, and sometimes it brought the most unlikely people together. The billionaire thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought him here, to his son's grave, on this particular day, and led him to this little girl, a stranger, crying quietly among the tombstones. He wondered if this encounter was more than coincidence, perhaps a reminder that even in the darkest moments, human connection could appear unexpected and transformative. Even in sorrow, there was a lesson, a chance to recognize that pain was not meant to be faced alone. He reached out hesitantly, placing a gentle hand near hers, not touching, just offering reassurance, and she looked at him with wide, searching eyes. It was a silent acknowledgement of shared humanity, a wordless understanding that grief, as heavy and isolating as it could feel, was something that could also unite people. It was a moment suspended in time, a quiet, fragile bridge between two lives that would never forget this encounter, one defined not by wealth or status, but by sorrow, empathy, and the unexpected beauty of human connection. And as the wind rustled through the trees, the billionaire realized that this simple moment, sitting beside a weeping child in a lonely cemetery, was already beginning to change him, teaching him something that no money, no power, no privilege could ever provide, that loss was universal, and that even strangers could help heal the deepest wounds. The billionaire sat quietly beside the little girl, unsure how long they should remain in the silence that had fallen between them. It was not uncomfortable, not in the usual way, but charged with the strange weight of grief that seemed to stretch beyond words. He noticed how small she looked in the vast cemetery, her figure trembling slightly in the cold air, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she continued to face her sorrow alone. He wanted to speak, to comfort her, yet he hesitated, unsure whether a stranger's words could reach the depth of pain she carried. For a few minutes, he simply watched, listening to the soft sound of her sobs, the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. He realized that this moment was delicate, fragile, like a thin thread connecting two very different lives, one wealthy and powerful, the other small and vulnerable. He thought about all the times he had tried to fix problems with money, with solutions, with gestures that could never reach the heart, and now he understood that some pain could only be met with presence, not solutions. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentle, careful not to startle her. "Do you want to tell me who you are crying for?" The question hung in the air, simple, yet heavy with curiosity and concern. The little girl looked up at him, her eyes red from crying but shining with honesty. "It's someone I loved," she whispered, "someone very special. I can't forget him." The billionaire felt a lump rise in his throat, recognizing that feeling all too well, the ache of missing someone who could never be replaced. He nodded slowly, not interrupting, not trying to fill the silence with words, simply acknowledging her grief. In that quiet exchange, a bridge began to form between them, a connection neither expected. The billionaire realized that grief could be shared silently, that understanding could exist without explanations, and that sometimes empathy was more powerful than any advice or consolation. He wanted her to know that he understood, even if he could not completely share the pain. The girl wiped her tears with the edge of her sleeve, and for the first time, she spoke a little more. "I come here often," she said softly, "to feel close to him, when no one else is around." The billionaire's heart tightened, realizing that her sorrow had a routine, a rhythm, a quiet courage he had never seen before. She had learned to carry her grief alone, and yet, in this moment, she allowed him into it, a stranger who had lost someone too, a man who understood too well the emptiness that loss leaves behind. He wanted to ask more questions, but he hesitated, fearing that words could spoil the fragile understanding that had formed. Instead, he simply offered his presence, the silent company of someone who was willing to sit, to listen, and to witness her sorrow without judgment. There was a lesson in this for him, one he had not expected to learn at a cemetery on a cold afternoon, that sometimes, grief required no words, only a heart willing to feel alongside another. Minutes passed. The world outside the cemetery seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, bound together by an invisible thread of shared pain. He watched as she traced circles in the dirt with her small fingers, as if drawing comfort from the act itself, and he marveled at how children, even in their deepest sadness, could find ways to cope that adults often forgot. He thought about his own son, and the moments he had missed, realizing that he had much to learn about patience, empathy, and the small, quiet ways people heal. The billionaire shifted slightly, careful not to invade her space, and spoke again, softly. "Sometimes, sharing your sadness can make it a little lighter, even if only a little." He didn't know if she would respond, but she nodded faintly, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of caution and trust. That single nod felt like an invitation, a small acknowledgement that he was allowed to be part of her grief, not as a savior, but as a companion, someone who could sit beside her in silence, and that was enough. In that quiet moment, he understood that grief was not a weakness, nor a burden to hide, but a bond that could connect people across worlds, across differences, across wealth and age. He felt a warmth, a strange hope that perhaps even in the most lonely of sorrow, connections could be formed, and understanding could be found in the eyes of a stranger. A little black girl, weeping alone, had opened a door he never expected to find, and he realized that life, even in tragedy, held moments of unexpected beauty, of human connection, of silent understanding. And as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the sound of their quiet breathing, the billionaire knew this encounter was not by chance. It was a lesson in humility, in patience, and in the power of being present. He remained seated, watching her, feeling the weight of her sorrow and the strength of her spirit, knowing that this moment would stay with him forever, shaping the way he understood grief, love, and the unexpected ways people touch each other's lives. The little girl sniffled softly, her small shoulders trembling as she tried to steady herself. The billionaire remained silent for a moment, unsure whether to speak or let her process her grief in her own way. He felt an unusual mixture of nervousness and compassion, realizing that this child had been carrying a weight far heavier than most adults ever experienced, yet something about her bravery struck him. The quiet courage of someone so young, sitting alone at a cemetery, facing the pain of loss without complaint. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentle and careful. "It's okay to cry," he said, "sometimes letting it out is the only way to feel better." The girl looked up at him, her eyes red and glossy, and for the first time, a flicker of recognition passed between them. He did not rush her, did not ask for details or explanations. He simply acknowledged her sorrow and let her know that it was acceptable, that grief was human, and human emotions were never wrong. I just miss him so much," the girl whispered, her voice breaking. "He was my friend. He promised he would always be there, and now he's gone." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of her young heart, and the billionaire felt a pang of pain strike deep inside him. The honesty of a child's grief, so raw and unfiltered, was almost unbearable, yet it was also beautiful in its truth, reminder that love and loss were universal, crossing age, race, and circumstance. He shifted slightly closer, careful not to overwhelm her, and said softly, "I know the feeling. I lost someone too, someone very important to me. I understand the emptiness you feel right now." The girl paused, her tearful eyes searching his face, and for the first time, she seemed to sense that he truly understood, not as an adult pretending to be wise, but as someone who had felt the sting of loss firsthand, someone who could share the pain without judgment. The billionaire thought about his own son, about the moments he would never have back, the laughter that would never echo through his home again. He realized that grief was not something to be hidden or suppressed, it was something to honor, to feel fully, and, sometimes, to share with others who understood. The girl's presence, her openness, her willingness to weep without fear, reminded him that vulnerability was not weakness. It was strength, it was humanity, it was the bridge that connected hearts across distance and experience. "I come here sometimes," the girl said after a long pause, because no one else remembers him like I do. It's like, if I'm here, he's not completely gone." The billionaire nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her words. He understood that memory was a powerful way to keep love alive, that grieving was a way of holding on to what mattered most, that presence, physical, emotional, or even just in thought, was the greatest gift we could give to those we had lost. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handkerchief, offering it to her with a gentle smile. She hesitated for a moment but accepted it, dabbing at her tears, and a small bond seemed to form in that simple act. The billionaire realized that sometimes, comfort did not require grand gestures, but small, thoughtful actions, acts of kindness that said, without words, "I see you. I understand. You are not alone." As they sat together, he began to notice the little things about her, the way she clutched her knees, the subtle shift of her gaze toward the grave, the quiet determination in her posture. Despite the grief, there was resilience, a strength born from love and loss. He felt humbled, recognizing that children often carried more courage than many adults could ever imagine, and that his own sorrow could be softened, even slightly, by simply witnessing her bravery. The sun had begun to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the cemetery, yet the billionaire barely noticed. Engrossed in the delicate moment unfolding beside him, he realized that life often placed people together at unexpected times for reasons we might not immediately understand, that this little girl, weeping quietly at a grave, was teaching him a lesson he had not known he needed to learn. That grief could be shared, that empathy could heal, and that sometimes, the presence of another human being was enough to make even the heaviest sorrow a little lighter. He gently said, "It's okay to feel, it's okay to miss him, and it's okay to remember. Your love for him is what keeps him alive, in your heart, in your memories." She looked at him with tearful eyes, and for the first time, a faint, fragile smile appeared, a small, quiet acknowledgement that he had not come as a stranger, but as someone who could understand, someone who could witness her pain without trying to fix it, someone who could simply be there. And in that moment, amidst the stillness of the cemetery, the billionaire realized that sometimes, the most profound lessons come not from business or wealth, but from the unexpected, raw, and honest emotions of a child, teaching him the true meaning of compassion, presence, and the unexpected power of human connection. The billionaire and the little girl sat side by side in the quiet of the cemetery, and for the first time, a strange sense of calm settled over him. It was not the kind of calm that comes from control or certainty, but the quiet, deep calm that comes from understanding someone else's pain and realizing you are not entirely alone in your own. He watched her small hands fidget with a patch of grass, picking at tiny blades as if each one could somehow absorb her grief, and he marveled at the delicate courage it took for a child to sit in sorrow without running away. For a while, neither of them spoke, yet the silence was not empty, it was filled with unspoken understanding, a bridge between two very different lives, one filled with unimaginable wealth and the other with unimaginable loss, and yet, in that moment, they were connected by something far more profound, shared grief. The billionaire realized that pain, as isolating as it could feel, had a way of uniting souls in ways that joy never could, that the very act of witnessing another person's sorrow could become a gift, a way to honor both their lives. Slowly, the girl began to tell him more, her voice hesitant at first. He was my best friend, she said. We promised each other that we would always be together, and now he's gone, and it feels like part of me is gone too. Her words were simple, yet every syllable carried the weight of a love that had been lost too soon. The billionaire felt a sharp pang of recognition, remembering his own son, the tiny hands that had once clutched his, the laughter that had filled his home, and the unbearable silence that had replaced it. He reached out, placing a hand gently near hers on the grass, a silent gesture of solidarity, not intrusion, not pity, but companionship. I know, he whispered softly, I know what it feels like to lose someone you love, someone who was your whole world. And even though it hurts now, it doesn't mean their love disappears. It stays with you, in the memories, in the way you feel about life, and in how you carry them with you. She glanced at him, a small spark of understanding flickering in her tear-filled eyes, and for the first time, she seemed to relax slightly, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had been acknowledged. The billionaire thought about the strange turns life had taken to bring him here, to this unexpected encounter with a child whose sorrow mirrored his own. He realized that grief could not be planned, controlled, or avoided, but it could be met with presence, empathy, and patience. He began to see that even someone as powerful as he was could learn from the quiet courage of a child. That true understanding did not come from money or status, but from the willingness to sit beside someone in their pain without judgment, without hurry, simply sharing the human experience. Hours seemed to pass in that still, sacred space, and gradually the girl's sobs softened, her breathing became steadier, and the tension in her small body began to ease. She looked at him, and this time, the billionaire noticed a glimmer of hope, fragile but undeniable. The simple fact that he had been there, that he had listened, that he had acknowledged her pain without trying to fix it, had made a difference. And it was a lesson he would carry with him forever. He found himself reflecting on life, on how often he had rushed through moments, preoccupied with wealth, with power, with achievements that now seemed meaningless in the face of loss. Here, in a quiet cemetery, beside a little girl grieving someone she loved, he understood that the essence of life was connection, compassion, and shared humanity. The billionaire realized that grief, as heavy and isolating as it felt, could also teach resilience, empathy, and the power of silent support. Finally, the girl stood up slowly, brushing the grass from her clothes, and looked at him with a small, tentative smile. Thank you, she said softly, for being here. The billionaire nodded, feeling a warmth he had not felt in years, a sense of purpose, of meaning, of something real, something beyond wealth or title. He realized that in this small moment, they had both been healed, if only a little, by the simple act of sitting together in grief. As she walked away, he watched her tiny figure fade among the gravestones, and a strange mixture of sadness and gratitude filled him. He knew he would never forget this encounter, that it had changed him in ways that money, power, or influence never could, and in the silence that followed, he understood that life, even in its darkest moments, had a way of giving unexpected gifts, lessons in love, and reminders of the quiet strength that lived in every human heart. The billionaire remained seated at the edge of the grave long after the little girl had walked away. The chill in the air had deepened, yet he barely noticed it. Lost in thought, he replayed the encounter over and over in his mind, each detail, the soft tremble of her shoulders, the way her eyes glistened with unshed tears, the quiet strength she carried despite her grief, kept him rooted to the spot. He realized that this small, fragile child had taught him more about life, loss, and love in a few short hours than years of wealth and experience ever had. As he looked at the grave, the name of his son etched into the cold marble seemed to shine in a different light. It was no longer just a symbol of loss, but a reminder of connection, of love that transcended absence, of the ways grief could bring strangers together and open doors to understanding and empathy. He thought of the little girl, of how she had faced her sorrow alone and yet allowed him into it, and he felt a deep respect, a kind of awe for her resilience. He rose slowly and walked toward the row of trees that bordered the cemetery, letting the wind sweep over him. As he moved, he reflected on his life, on the choices he had made, the moments he had missed with his son, and the emptiness that had followed him since that fateful day. For the first time, he didn't feel anger, guilt, or frustration. Instead, he felt clarity, a quiet understanding that grief, while painful, could also teach, could also heal, could also guide him toward becoming a better father, a better man, a better human being. The billionaire began to think about the world through the girl's eyes, imagining the life she had lived, the loss she had endured, and the strength it must have taken to sit in this graveyard alone. To him, she became a symbol, a reminder that life's most profound lessons often come from unexpected places, from those we might overlook, from those who seem small but carry immense courage. He realized that empathy was not given. It was learned, cultivated through shared experiences, and strengthened by acts of kindness, no matter how small. He pictured her returning home, walking through a quiet street, the evening shadows stretching long and thin, and he imagined how different life could be if people allowed themselves to truly see one another, to notice the pain and joy that existed just beneath the surface. He wanted to carry that lesson forward, to live differently, to embrace not only his grief but the grief of others, to be present, to listen, and to understand without judgment. As he stood beneath the trees, he thought about the nature of human connection, how sometimes a fleeting encounter could change a lifetime, how a single act of listening, a single moment of presence, could heal wounds we didn't even know were still open. He realized that wealth and status had never given him what this little girl had, the ability to feel deeply, to connect honestly, to witness life in its rawest, truest form. The billionaire closed his eyes, letting the wind carry away his thoughts, and felt an unfamiliar sense of peace, not because his grief had disappeared, but because he had learned to honor it, to see it, and to let it connect him with another human being. He knew now that loss was not only about absence but about presence, presence in memory, presence in compassion, presence in the willingness to sit beside someone and share in their sorrow. When he finally opened his eyes, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, painting the cemetery in golden and amber light. He felt renewed, as if he had been given a gift too profound for words. The little girl, with her courage and innocence, had shown him a way to carry grief with dignity and love, to transform sorrow into understanding, and to find hope even in the quietest, loneliest places. Turning toward his car, the billionaire felt the weight of the day settle gently on his shoulders, lighter somehow, tempered by the lessons he had learned and the connection he had made. He promised himself that he would carry this encounter in his heart forever, allowing it to guide him in the choices he made, the people he loved, and the legacy he hoped to leave. And in that moment, he realized that life, even in its darkest, most painful corners, still had a way of giving unexpected gifts, teaching unexpected lessons, and revealing the quiet, transformative power of human connection. The next morning, the billionaire found himself returning to the cemetery, not out of obligation, but because something inside him had shifted overnight. He felt a pull he could not explain, a quiet need to see the little girl again, to understand more about her, to witness the courage she had shown. He walked slowly along the familiar paths, the grass still wet with dew, his mind replaying the previous day, the way her small frame had trembled yet never broken, and how, in her sorrow, she had taught him the most important lesson of his life. As he approached the row of graves where he had first seen her, he noticed her sitting there again, her tiny body wrapped in a worn jacket, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the ground, lost in thought. The billionaire paused, unsure if he should interrupt, but then realized that he no longer wanted to stay apart. That connection, fragile as it was, needed attention, needed presence, and he quietly stepped closer, keeping his distance yet signaling that he was there, willing to share the moment with her. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and cautious at first, but this time, there was no fear, only recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that he was no longer just a stranger passing through. He offered a small nod, a gesture of greeting and understanding, and she returned it, the faintest smile breaking through her sadness. It was a simple exchange, but in it, the billionaire felt the weight of human connection, the invisible threads that bound them together through shared grief and shared understanding. He sat down slowly beside her, careful not to startle, and for a long moment, they simply watched the cemetery around them, the morning sunlight filtering through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the gravestones. The billionaire felt a sense of peace he had not known in years, as if simply sitting beside her, sharing the quiet, was enough to heal a small part of his own aching heart. The girl began to speak softly, recounting stories of the person she had lost, her words hesitant but growing in confidence, and he listened with rapt attention, giving her the gift of undivided presence. He realized that life's most profound lessons often come not from grand gestures or wealth, but from the courage and honesty of others, even those smallest in size. She told him about the games they had played, the promises they had made, and the laughter that once filled her world, and with each word, the billionaire felt the raw power of memory and love, how loss could feel endless and unbearable, yet could also become a bridge connecting hearts in the most unexpected ways. At one point, she paused and looked at him directly. Do you miss him too?" she asked hesitantly. Her small voice carried the weight of a child trying to understand grief. The billionaire nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "Yes," he said softly, "I miss someone very dear to me, someone I will never forget. And sitting here with you, I understand a little better how much it hurts to lose someone you love." She nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful, as if considering the strange comfort in knowing that someone else, even a billionaire, could understand her pain. Time seemed to stretch, each moment rich with emotion, and the billionaire felt a strange, comforting shift inside him. He realized that connection did not require words, or solutions, or explanations, only the willingness to be present, to feel alongside another, to witness grief without judgment. The little girl leaned slightly toward him, not speaking, just offering her quiet company, and he understood that in this small act, there was immense trust, immense courage, and immense humanity. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light across the cemetery, the billionaire thought about the lessons he had learned, that grief could teach resilience, that sorrow could bring people together, and that even strangers could change lives with a single act of presence and understanding. He also realized that he could carry these lessons beyond the cemetery, into the world, into his family, and into his own heart, transforming his pain into something meaningful. Finally, he stood, brushing the dew from his coat, and looked down at her. "You are very brave," he said softly, "and you have taught me more than you will ever know." She smiled faintly, and this time, there was no sadness, only recognition and a quiet bond that had formed between them, two lives, connected by grief, by courage, and by the unexpected power of human empathy. As he walked away from the grave, he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of love, and a quiet hope that even in the darkest moments, human connection could light the way. The little girl remained seated, yet he could feel that the encounter had changed her as well, that in the presence of someone who truly saw her sorrow, she had found the courage to continue, to heal, and to carry her love forward. The billionaire walked slowly away from his son's grave, the weight on his shoulders lighter than it had been in months, yet the ache in his heart remained, a reminder of love lost but also of lessons gained. He thought about the little girl, her small hands, her trembling shoulders, her quiet courage, and realized that their brief encounter had changed him more than any business deal or worldly achievement ever could. She had shown him the power of presence, of empathy, of simply sitting with someone in their grief without trying to fix it. As he passed the rows of tombstones, the names carved in marble seemed less like markers of finality and more like threads connecting the lives of everyone who had loved and been loved. he understood that grief was universal, a language that did not require words, and that sometimes the deepest connections are formed in silence, in shared sorrow, in moments that appear ordinary yet hold the weight of eternity. The billionaire found a quiet bench beneath a tree near the edge of the cemetery, and he sat down, letting the wind sweep over him. He thought of his son, of the laughter that once filled their home, of the promises he had made as a father and the ones he had failed to keep, yet he also thought of the little girl, and he realized that love and loss were not solely burdens, they were teachers, guides leading him toward understanding, compassion, and the quiet courage to feel fully. In the distance, he imagined the girl walking home, carrying with her a small measure of peace, the memory of someone who had sat with her in her grief, who had acknowledged her pain and validated her love. He pictured her returning to her life, strengthened by the experience, knowing that even in loneliness, connections could be formed, that someone could see her sorrow and not turn away, and that this shared humanity was what made life meaningful. The billionaire's thoughts drifted to the future, to how he might honor both his son and the lessons he had learned from the girl. He realized that wealth and power were meaningless without love, empathy, and human connection, that life's true value was measured not in possessions or achievements, but in the relationships we cultivate, the care we show, and the ways we touch others' hearts. He stood slowly, the breeze lifting his coat, and walked back toward the exit of the cemetery, each step purposeful, reflective, and lighter than before. He knew he would return to the world changed, carrying the quiet strength he had witnessed in the little girl, the reminder that sorrow could teach, that grief could connect, and that love endured beyond absence, even when it seemed impossible. As he reached the gates, he glanced back at the rows of gravestones, at the little girl who had unknowingly healed part of his broken heart, and felt a surge of gratitude, not only for the encounter but for the understanding it had brought. He realized that life was filled with fleeting, transformative moments, and that sometimes, strangers could teach us more about ourselves than anyone else ever could. Driving away from the cemetery, he felt the tension in his chest ease, a quiet hope taking its place. He knew that his son's memory would always be with him, and now, the memory of the little girl, her tears, her courage, and the bond they had shared, would remain as well, a living testament to the unexpected beauty that could emerge from sorrow. That evening, in his mansion, he sat alone for a while, reflecting on the day, on the lessons he had learned, and on the subtle, profound way grief could teach empathy, humility, and connection. He understood now that the pain of loss was not meant to isolate, but to open the heart, and that even a billionaire, surrounded by wealth and influence, could find healing in the presence of someone who simply needed to be seen. He whispered his son's name softly, feeling both sadness and gratitude, knowing that life was fragile, fleeting, and precious, and that the encounters we have, the hearts we touch, and the love we give and receive were the things that truly mattered. In that quiet moment, he promised himself that he would carry these lessons forward, that he would honor the memories of those he had lost by living more fully, loving more deeply, and noticing the small, unexpected gifts that life offered. And somewhere, in a small part of the world, a little black girl who had wept alone at a grave now felt a faint warmth, a quiet reassurance that her sorrow had mattered, that her courage had been witnessed, and that even in grief, human connection could shine, showing both of them that loss, while painful, could also bring light, hope, and unexpected, lasting bonds.